Selling your company is a big decision. But what happens when you sell to private equity and you decide to stay on as the CEO? Today, we're talking with my guest, Kenny Ratton, who is the founder and CEO of Radiant RFID. And he's been navigating this exact path for the last 5 years. In this conversation, we dive into what it's really like to go from answering to yourself to reporting to a board of directors, how a business can change under new ownership, and some of the lessons that Kenny's learned that every founder really should hear before considering a sale. So, whether you are thinking about an exit or just curious on what life after a deal looks like, this conversation is one that you're not going to miss. Let's dive in. Welcome, Kenny. I have a very, very important question to start us off here today, and that is, what happens when you sell your company, but you choose to stay on as the CEO?
Well, that's a jump right in. So the interesting thing is, because a lot of the pressures of other pieces, finances, and things like that are taken off your plate, it's actually a little bit relieving. You can actually refocus. And even though it's still your baby, and the way we were acquired, it stayed our baby. The it was kind of more of a relief. I had a lot of friends that had companies here in Austin that, matter of fact, I was just talking to a guy who only made it a month after the acquisition. And I've been on now since 21 as CEO and head sales. But yeah, it was, for me, it was a sort of a big relief. I didn't have to worry about payroll. They had deep pockets, if I can say that. And we were not worried about small changes in market and things like that. Obviously, big things happened. We had conversations with the board, but ultimately, that was, again, for me, it was a relief. If you pick the right acquirer, I think it would be a relief.
That's a really cool kind of way to think about it, though. I mean, especially when you look at an acquisition or a major change within a business like that, it allows you to kind of, I don't know, a lot of our listeners and viewers are going to be entrepreneurs, some early in their journey, some a little bit further down the road, but almost all of them can, empathize with the fact of having multiple different hats that they have to wear within the business, and being able to kind of really focus on one singular role. I imagine kind of allows for different things within kind of growth of a business. So maybe let's take a quick step back for the audience to kind of understand the business, the acquisition, things like that. So you started this business back in 2004,
Yep.
was acquired in 2021, still in business today, rocking and rolling, CEO of the company. So maybe just take us back to the origin of Radiant RFID. And let's, first and foremost, like, what is the problem that the business set out to solve, and how has that evolved over time?
That's a good question. So we started out. A friend of mine came to us, and he had been approached by IBM they were doing trade shows. And IBM at the time was looking at, if you remember, there was an ad where a tractor trailer pulled up and a guy sitting at a desk in the middle of the desert, and he pulls up and he goes, "You're going the wrong way." And the driver's like, "How do you know?" And he goes, "RFID." That made some of the marketing team go, "Oh, we should be using RFID in our trade shows." And so to track, how many attendees and what preferences were and things like that. So this friend of ours, I was working at a company called Trilogy Software at the time, asked us if we'd help invest. And so it started out as start a company to just focus on RFID in the trade show world. And then that over time evolved because we started meeting, AT&T and T and all these other people. And I know for Walmart was doing RFID, the DoD was doing RFID, but there were really a ton of people out there doing it. So we basically just started responding to interest we had at shows. We were setting up, like, tracking people in and out of conference rooms and stuff like that. We weren't, that was our role in the world, was just track people in and out of conference rooms. We patented a wristband that actually South by Southwest used for probably 6 years. And that was kind of the beginning. We evolved into really asset management, and we started tracking big capital assets. So people like Texas State University that has a lot of laptops or computers or other hardware that they buy, anything on your balance sheet that has to be kept
Mm.
up with. If you have a fiduciary responsibility for it, then you need to keep up with it. And where is it? When you get audited, they don't ask you how many do you have? They say, show me this one. And so we started getting into the audit side and how people did that, and just kind of grew from there over time. Then we started developing more of the product into what, and if I'm going too long, let me know, but ultimately I get excited about this. But
Yeah, no, please keep going.
we got into a higher vault. So most of the stuff we tracked, Twitter was a huge customer before the Elon acquisition. But basically people with large number of things to keep up with, that was
Hmm.
what our thing was. We then started moving into, and that was very fixed, bolted to the ground, although those things moved and more than you'd think. A typical data center, by the way, 25% turnover on the floor per year. So if you think
Oh,
about
that's interesting.
you have 100,000 servers on the floor, you 25,000 of them moving on and off. So
Wow.
that's kind of in this new world of data centers with AI and all the things that are
Hmm.
going on with Bitcoin mining and all that, that is a bigger deal now than it ever was. But we ended up getting approached by Ford Motor Company and a couple other big automotives and aerospace, and with what we call high volume, high mobility assets, returnable containers, fixtures that cost 1,600, 1,700 bucks that go back and forth between Mexico and suppliers. And so being able to keep up with that, and we pivoted our product to that. So that's kind of the evolution, and that's actually turned into our biggest piece of business, just because unlike a university might have 20,000 assets, we're 500,000 in an automotive company. So that's kind of the way it works. So
That's really cool.
mhm.
I think the way that you explained it, I think really helps the viewer, the listener, really kind of understand what it is and kind of how that works. And I like that you kind of took that step and said, well, think about anything that's on the balance sheet, right? Anything that's really a capital asset, like those are ultimately the types of things that we're talking about here. I think that makes it a little bit easier to understand. So taking us through kind of this journey. Now let's fast forward to kind of the close to 2021. So went through an acquisition, had some changes within the business there. But I think when we were talking offline here, this wasn't necessarily the first option that you had. There was a couple ways to look at acquisition prior to this. So I wanted to first ask on any kind of key inflection points. When you think back at the business overall, like major wins or turning points within the business that really set it up for some form of outside investor to say, hey, I'd be interested in what y'all are doing.
Right.
What were some of those things that trigger those types of conversations within the business's kind of journey overall?
Another good question. So we had several points in time where we were hitting it big with some certain product, piece of the product, if you will. And when the revenue started really accelerating, we know enough people here in town that, you talk over coffee or whatever, and they're like, oh, we know somebody who might be interested. And so those pieces come together kind of naturally, if you will. And it is a network of people that are like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that would have interest to a VC or a private equity or maybe a larger software company to pick you up, things like that. Especially if you're creating a niche within an area that maybe a bigger software company would like.
Mm.
Those are the types of things, like IBM acquiring different companies here in town. That's quite often, hey, there you guys got a niche that would be great as part of our portfolio. Um, so that was one of them. The funny thing is the last one right before the final one was COVID hit, right? The Ukraine war hit. Um, the COVID hit, we pivoted actually one of our asset management products, and it was actually Nicole, my wife, we were talking, and she goes, "Don't you guys just tell how far people are from their assets?" And I was like, with phones and different stuff. I'm like, yeah. And she's like, well, why can't you do that with people and telling them they're 6 feet apart or stuff? And so we actually nearly overnight pivoted, and I say overnight, pivoted one of our products from picking up assets to distance between people. And we rolled that out to the UAW and Ford to keep some of their plants open longer. Matter of fact, the ones
Oh.
that were building the ventilators. Remember when there was a ventilator
Okay. Yeah.
shortage?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
So we rolled out our social distancing product on top of our asset management product, and that kept plants open for quite some time. That created this pretty good excitement here in Austin, and I had several VCs are like, well, we could do something with that. Um, Too short of a window, by the way, to really make a lot of headway and a lot of money. But we did. We kept, the lights on during a time when a lot of our customers are plants. When they're shutting their doors, they're not buying your stuff. And
Yeah, I mean
so,
that's exactly what was going through my mind is like
yeah.
the downstream effect of that for those
Oh, yeah.
clients had to have been massive.
Mhm.
I mean
Yeah.
it
Our pricing model is how many things are you tracking, and we charge a per year fee for that,
mhm.
software SaaS. And so when you shut your doors and you stop tracking, our numbers go through the floor. And
Yeah.
so that was a savior pivot, but also attracted the VC environment. So that was one of them. Now that Embrace, who purchased us in 21, that wasn't their focus. They saw a good core business with the asset management, all that, and
Mhm.
so it was a nice to have, but it wasn't. Some literally, they didn't even consider it in the purchase price. So much to my chagrin, but yeah. So that was that. So, but yeah, we I think the one, whether it's your Achilles heel where you're too flexible and pivot too quickly as an entrepreneur, but I will tell you, we're still here today.
Mhm.
I don't think we would be had we not done something very creative. And my CTO, Stefan Schwartz here in town, you know, he took this idea and ran with it, and we had a product in literally days. From, you know, yeah, it's pretty cool. So that was fun. But
That
yeah,
is.
that's what led to the final acquisition. Was really, though, it was also kind of starting the COVID was settling out a little bit, and the war hit and all that. So it was a little more. It made a lot more sense that you take on some money to keep the doors open even longer, and
Mhm.
like that. So
So
never
let's
a
talk.
dull moment, as we say.
Yeah, no kidding, no
Yeah.
kidding. So let's talk a little bit about the process of acquisition as a general theme, right? So we
Mhm.
were talking offline again because kind of what does that look like? What's that feel like? What are some of the decisions that come along with choosing to go down this path?
Mhm.
So I mean, there's always the option that you could have said, nope, we're not going to be
Mhm.
acquired by anyone. I'm going to keep
Mhm.
running this thing and grow it on my own.
Mhm.
What were some of the things that went through your mind and anyone
Mhm.
that you may have consulted with, things like that throughout that
Yeah.
time period? To say, you know what, acquisition may be a really good path for us, and we should
Mhm.
seriously consider, if we can hit XYZ terms or whatever that looked like. Walk us through kind of what that process looks like for someone who may be thinking the same thing down the road. Hey, I want to get acquired. I don't want to keep this business
Mhm.
long term. What were some of the considerations that you had?
Well, there's probably the first point at 20-ish year, or whatever it was in business at that time, um, where you're like, hey, I've been doing this for a very long time, and I'd like to get some equity out of the
Mm-hmm.
business and live less chaotic, if you will, life, have a little more cash in the bank. Um, one of the things I was telling you before is like when you're running it yourself and you have big customers that pay very slow, you're always dipping in your own pocket to make payroll here and there, and it's all over the place. The So cashing out a little bit was one big one. The other one was we had about that same time taken on some very large contracts. And the banking world, when I first started the business, if I had a purchase order, I could go to Plains Capital or somebody. Matter of fact, Plains Capital was my bank. I could go to them. I had a purchase order for $800,000. They would fund the $800,000. Now they might call the CFO of the company, but they'll fund that, put that in your bank account. You have that as capital to work and deliver the deal and things like that. Um, so the I would say that when you start getting these bigger and bigger deals, you have to have a partner. The banking rules
Mm.
changed a bit, and Plains Capital couldn't do that anymore. And so I was like faced with, okay, I'm going to take on this $5 million deal. I can negotiate pretty well, but they probably won't pre-fund the majority of it like the bank used to.
Mm.
So I think those types of financial cash out, simplifying your life a little bit because the acquirer generally takes on the finance operations and things like that. So some of the things that kind of keep an entrepreneur up at night, they take those on and really help. Although I still got the gray hair for it, but they take on a lot of the stress of running the business.
Yeah,
So yeah,
you know,
those are the considerations.
I really like that. I mean, when someone's thinking about it, I'm a big fan of knowing, when are you going to exit the business, right? Now, there's so many different ways to take a look at
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
For some of our, folks that we talk to, like, well, Tanner, I never want to exit my business. I'm like, well, we're all going to exit one way or another. It's either vertically or horizontally. Like at some point,
Yeah.
it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But being able to think about like, well, when do I take some equity off the table? When do I start, offloading some of that stuff, and what could that look like?
Mm-hmm.
I really like the concept of understanding that. Well, maybe sometimes, depending on your business, you've got contracts, you've got things that are going to be bigger than you've ever done before, and
Mm-hmm.
being able to do that effectively, whether it's finding the influx of talent that you need, or
Mm-hmm.
it's the systems and processes that aren't built out yet, or it's the funding piece, as you mentioned,
Right.
and growing to that next level at a more rapid pace may require more than some of the partners or institutions
Right.
or
Mm-hmm.
strategic alliances, things like that you've had in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like those pieces. So what's been the biggest things that have changed? So you made the opportunity, allowed the acquisition, all of that kind of stuff, moved into now the role of being CEO, and ideally predominantly just the CEO versus anything else that may have been on your plate beforehand.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest things that changed for you as you
Mm-hmm.
moved through post acquisition?
Okay. So I still do primary biz dev. Okay. So, and I think any CEO does. Still CEO. So that's kind of my role. I was able to offload finance, which was a huge piece for me because you can't make great decisions and really run your business. And it's kind of funny when you're an entrepreneur, you have 3 or 4 people, can't afford a good finance guy, and so it is one of those things. It's kind of like I used to tell people, when you start your business, the first person you should hire is an admin because they take all this off of your plate that you are wasting your time on. And it's not wasted time; it's just things that are probably not your wheelhouse. So finance was the first thing. I think obviously making payroll got a lot easier. You don't have the daily stress of that, and then being able to pretty much take any size deal you want, and
Mm.
all you got to do is justify the profit margins and things like that, which you should do anyway. I think those are the big pieces that were changing, and actually that piece of it, now the biggest change I think for me is being much more disciplined about the decisions we're making and the rails of profitability, growth, and things like that. As an entrepreneur, I mentioned swinging for the fences quite a bit, and sometimes that doesn't make sense, and sometimes it does, but most of the time it probably doesn't. We've done better now that we have rails and reporting, and I'm not just reporting to myself. It's That's probably the biggest change. It was scary at first, and I still say I'm not the best at not working for myself. So, yeah, it's picking your acquirer, getting to know their culture, what they intend to do, and all that stuff. Make sure you're there, but those types of things help you grow. Like I feel I've grown over the last since 21, more than probably the previous 21 years. So I think those are the big changes.
I like it. I like the discipline, the reporting, and I want to ask some questions around that. So, having been a true entrepreneur, reporting to yourself, and now shifting over to reporting to a board, I'd love to ask some questions specifically about that. But before we get into any of that piece, I'm curious for you. Did you have much resistance to it? Was it a hard change to shift from I don't have to do this reporting at this level and now I
Yeah.
have to?
Yeah.
What like emotionally? How did that feel to
Mm.
make that transition?
Well, I will say I was lucky in that they started out very soft touch. So it wasn't a lot of, I want this report on my desk at Friday morning at 9 a.m. So there was not a lot of that. So I would say they did a good job of, and the primary acquirer, the main representative, he's just a good person, right? And so he kind of soft pedaled it in. It's gotten a lot more rigid since, like, we need this report by July 1st, or like, H1 needs to be done by July 15th. And so it's a lot more of that now. I had a bit of resistance. I think just, I think I know what's best, like especially when you're cost cutting. So,
Mm-hmm.
because you do have to. We had, even though we weren't really bloated or anything, it was just when you look where you're spending your money, sometimes if you
Yep.
look through somebody else's lens, you're like, oh. But that was a little offensive at first. We're like, we can't let go of any of the dev people. They've been with us for 10 years, and there's a lot of that. Now, we luckily didn't have to do any of that, and I was able to shift we moved buildings, reduced our rent, basically just shuffled dollars until we got down to the budget we needed to get to. So a little bit of that is kind of, you feel offended, I guess you'd say. I don't know the right
Yeah.
word, but that somebody's questioning your decisions. But after like looking back, I'm like, yeah, wow, you know what? We're going to hit 25% EBITDA this year. We've never hit 25% EBITDA. If I had done this when it was my own company, that would have been in my pocket. But when you're swinging for the fences, you're thinking that number is going to be so much bigger later, but that later with economic conditions and all that can continue to move out. And it's kind of like the semester that never ends in college. You're like, oh my God, I have to write this report over again, or what? That I thought the finals were over. So as an entrepreneur, you kind of quite often that carrot keeps getting moved down the road, and you never really get it. And that, going back to your earlier question, is one of the things you decide. An acquisition is the carrot at that moment, and it doesn't keep getting kicked down the road. I know what it is. I know
Mm.
exactly the number. And having done 18 years of that carrot, it's a big one, but it's just barely down the road. You're like, it's just out of my reach. So I think that's I tangent a little bit there, but I think that's really the whole picture.
I'm really glad that you shared some of the resistance. I love that you actually worded it in the way of it did feel a bit offensive almost. And I think in reality, there's a lot of entrepreneurs that likely feel the same thing if they're ever forced to do something similar in their business, right? Whether they
Yep.
actually are acquired or something else.
Mm.
I think back to we hired a new coach that had this type of knowledge and training, and
Mm.
brought that to us, and we had to do that. And
Yep.
boy, was that painful. Like,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
going through the P&L, looking at every team member, like everything, right?
Yep.
Putting reporting in place. It was like, man, this sucks.
Yeah.
But the flip side is it
Mm.
provided the discipline. It provided some fundamental things that
Mm.
we hadn't really had in place before.
Right.
When you look at how this works for the business today, and knowing what you know now, what you've learned along this journey, how much of that would you, in hindsight, if you could go back and implement some of those things pre-acquisition? Are there things that you would take back and do differently in the business as a result of the learnings that you've had post-acquisition?
Yes, I would definitely be a lot more disciplined in decision making. Um, like I said, one of the problems with being, I'm an engineer, so problems with being an engineer is customers come with you with a problem, and if I can figure out how to solve it, I want to go solve it. When you're focused on your business, and good entrepreneurs probably don't do this, but the rest of us um, are so happy to have like a customer with a problem that you can go solve that you'll kind of morph the product. We still do it a little bit, not bad, but we still do it a little bit. But that had we been more disciplined about that in product management, not to take away from Stefan, by the way, he does an amazing job. But we get excited about the problem solving, but with the lens of the finances being someone else's lens, and you're spending their money, you are a lot more disciplined about that decision. And they question us every month, why did this go up $300? And I'm like, well, it's only $300. But it's those kind of things. But that is, hey, I have to make decisions on the fly, and sometimes you're not going to agree with them, and I do still as the CEO, but I'm held accountable for it. And if eventually I guess I could get fired for it, but ultimately you just I think looking back, I just wish I'd had a lot more discipline. Probably, we had advisors here in town that we never officially made a part of the board. If we had done that step, I think we would have avoided the need really to be acquired. So,
that's an interesting take. So, what are some of the things that, again, in hindsight, knowing what you know today, if I'm an entrepreneur that's building up my business, I'm looking at potential acquisitions or looking at some way to exit my business to another company, what are some pieces of advice or things that you would want to share with them, having the knowledge that you have today that you may not have had before, that someone in your shoes, call it 6-7 years ago, starting to go down this journey, someone like that doesn't have, and you can provide them some of the insights that you know today going through the acquisition process, what would you share with them?
So going through the acquisition process. Yeah.
Making that choice, is it right for them? Even down to some like things to consider when considering terms, things like that.
Right. Yeah. So you're always going to get faced with the upfront cash, which is really attractive, traded off with some equity play, earn out or whatever, or even running business, employment contract, etc. So you're going to have multiple variables in that contract, terms and things like that, that even get into how much liability you're going to have after the purchase. And that one, actually, one of the potential acquirers, which had the best offer, had some liability terms that my legal team was like, you can't sign this. Because I would have had the liability even into retirement. And so, so I was like, oh, good to know. It was before ChatGPT as well, so you couldn't just load it in and go, where are my big risks?
So I note there, have a legal team to make sure is looking over the stuff, and there's a pretty big check mark to make sure that people are
a huge one. Matter of fact, I would even say during your operation of a small, getting larger company, having a good legal team is key. And it can't just be, in today's world, all AI driven. I mean, you can definitely get some insights, but there's nothing, and I'm sure this will come with time, like the experience of somebody who's done, like the firm I used, they do, I don't know if I can mention their name, but Jones Spross, if I can, you can bleep it out if not. But basically, they've done M&A for years. They've done so many transactions. They bring in that type of. I never had an internal legal team because the experience you can get outside of a $3 million, $5 million company is so much greater when you can lean on guys that have been doing $300 million companies. And so Um, Sorry. So my wife's leaving. So ultimately, that's the I think legal team. To be honest, if you look back, that's probably the biggest thing. They're still my legal team. The A good finance guy that can help you go through the numbers, build the. I will tell you, building out the models and the outcomes, then the different variables and all of that, having a good finance team or and accounting team, to be honest, are good pieces. Um, Good product team. I think you start pulling it all together. As a small company, you're making so many. Um, you're letting. I mean, few people doing too many things, and it's you can't do everything. Having these external resources allows you to do pretty much everything at a pretty cost effective rate. So, especially today. So, I think that, yeah, those are the things I'd say I look back on, and I'm actually happy that we had the team we had. Uh, and then the totally answer your question, but the looking back even today, that's still probably my biggest win. And actually, I learned that from when I was at Trilogy Software. We had a great legal team, and that is one of the things of doing contracts with big companies. Our companies are Fortune 100 plus, and so uh, um, their teams are very good at making sure that they win. And so having a good team on your side that says, we don't have to accept that. When you're an entrepreneur, you're like, oh, I have to take it to take the deal, and that's not true. So I think all of those, and I know I've jumped around a bit, but those are the kinds of things that I think about in an acquisition. The terms and conditions within the acquisition are important, obviously, as well. Like I mentioned, the one liability, how you do the earnout, and I always, for every acquisition offer we had, I was like, give me a model of what we look like as earnout, pick cash out, da, 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 because it gets complicated. I was like, give me a sample if this goes really well and this goes not so well. I wanted one pager summary of the numbers for each of the founders. And that was super helpful because little nuances within the terms sometimes can have a big impact. And then at the very end, if you're like, hey, you told me this, and this is what happened, but I didn't earn this. That's a really good piece of paper to keep with you in your back pocket. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Always ask for model. You can't ask for too much from these guys. They have so many people on their side doing numbers. You can just keep asking. So,
Yeah.
so
And the more you
yeah.
can get things in writing in any way, shape, or form allows for various levels of conversation later on. I mean,
Right.
that's a across pretty much all domains, not just within acquisition, but fairly good idea to ask for some of those types of things and be able to have it and refer
It
back
gets
to what we're
the
needed.
ambiguity out of what sentences and paragraphs and even tables within, I would say, even with our acquisition and as diligent as we were, there was misunderstanding as how you got there, even though I read it and they read it, it sounds exactly like you meant. They're like, but no, that doesn't mean that. I'm like, well, it does. and so, uh, and so, if you've got a good acquirer, you can come to a conclusion on that, or come to a solution. So you definitely have to, and not necessarily like your acquirer, but you definitely have to be able to work with them, and because there's gonna be something in every one of these term sheets we got, everything we got. There's always something that you are gonna have to discuss at some point. So yeah, I just don't expect it to be black and white for sure.
Well, there's something in there that you've now said twice, so I want to make sure that I reiterate it for the audience in case you caught it. But it was choosing an acquirer that you can actually work with, one that
Yeah.
that there is some alignment between different things. There's a way that's going to be a healthy relationship moving forward. Even as you just said, not necessarily like them per se, or you don't have to. I'm not assuming anything
Yeah.
here, but being able to work with them at a level that's
Right.
going to be beneficial for all parties involved.
Yeah.
So Let's before we kind of wrap out some of the conversation, one of my favorite things to do on this particular podcast is actually ask a few questions around AI. It's one of those
Okay.
things that I think it's fairly common knowledge, I hope, at this point, that most folks are realizing it's not going away. There's some involvement in things that are needed or learnings with it. So I'm always curious what other industries are doing, what other individuals are doing. What's been your take on AI overall? Are you using it personally? Are you using it within the business? How do you see that unfolding in your worldview?
So personally, definitely, I run all quite often run all things through it. Just one, the curiosity of what does it come out with, right? Pretty much every angle. The other thing is I like just even the experience of using it. You know, as the CEO, I should be aware of how what this is doing and all that. But as a company, we actually have an initiative, really from the top down, that everybody has to be learning and figuring out how to use it in their own job. There's some efficiencies you can get of just analyzing a spreadsheet, summarizing a meeting. You know, like I use Otter AI for meetings because it's nice to not have to take notes and I can focus on the call. That has improved. That's probably the single best use. But every person in our company, down to shipping, I say down to, sorry, shipping, receiving, every role in our company has some goal around using AI. And then we are building it into our platform, which is an analytics, machine learning, et cetera, platform for asset management. And so we're building it in and actually starting to roll that out as we speak, to be honest. So with some of our customers. So I think I do think there's a bit of overhype on it, although the stock market doesn't seem to think there's overhype. But I think, you should definitely be aware of what it can and can't do for you. And the can't is probably just as important as the can. And I think, though, it's just going to keep improving and helping eliminate, to be honest, like the mundane taking notes during a meeting. I mean, it's like if get rid of that and, you're talking about freeing up time for us as people, that's huge for me. So, I can't tell you how many times in the past I would be like 2 days after a meeting, if I didn't take good notes, I'd be like, what did we talk? Yeah. And you hate to get back on the phone with them. Like, did we talk? Because I may have 10 calls in a day, and
Yep.
if I don't take good notes and now I don't have to worry about it, it's awesome. So that's probably my best piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good use case, and I agree with you. It's gotten way better over time. I also really like the comment you made there about it's important to know what it can do, and it's important to know where its limitations are, and not because all the ways that it can't do it in terms of like, oh, you can't even like make it kind of try to do it, but sometimes it'll think it can do it and it really can't. And knowing the difference is kind of an important piece from time to time.
Yeah, it's interesting if you ask the same question in slightly different ways and see how the results change. I found that interesting. And again, I just like to play with it as a techie. It's just one of those things. It's like, what does it do? And then I can imagine my wife does the same thing. She'll use it and she'll go, that makes no sense. And I'm like, well, ask it this way. And so it's like, it is, you almost have to learn it. I think over time, you won't have to learn how to talk to it or, use it. But at the moment, the models are, and I haven't actually gotten into the 5.0 yet, but I think as the models continue to improve and the usages and the different styles of models, knowing what you're using it for is going to be a huge help. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I had a comment on one of my posts, I think it was earlier this last week, and I thought it was kind of an interesting frame. It was like, using AI actually allows us to ask the question beneath the question. So we can actually allow our brains to go like a step or two deeper than we normally would because we're kind of prompting and going through more of a conversation style and just our general writing. Like that's kind of a neat way to think about it. Right. If you take that optimistic view, there's ways that we can become, I don't know, better thinkers as a result of it versus getting too lazy, because you could easily go the other direction and be like, I don't have to do any thinking. I'm just going to ask it to do these things for me. So I thought that was kind of an interesting frame or interesting take.
It is, and it's like if if you can peel the onion a little bit yourself, but it takes a lot of effort. But if you can peel the onion and have help of this thing that can go out and get so much more information than you can in half an hour of researching, if it can make that easier for you, then our brains are going to be better at it than anything at the moment.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. It's going to make our own thought process more efficient. I mean, as you think as an engineer, one of the things you're trained to do is problem solve and peel the onion really well.
Yep.
This just speeds that up. So I think that's a great piece. Great insight.
I also really enjoy how you made the comment there that every team member has some level of goal around how to implement or how to use. I think, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a business owner that's looking at how do I implement this within my business, and you have a team, allowing the team members to look at their individual roles and look at how can I potentially implement some of these tools in. Now, I'm guessing it'll be very different depending on departments and industries and different things like that and job roles. But being able to kind of take a step back and say, hey, we encourage you to use this tool because it's here and it can make everybody better. I think that's a really cool frame, and I just wanted to kind of call that out since you had mentioned it there.
Yeah, I think I would assume a lot of companies are doing the same thing, but if we're 30 people, so it's pretty easy to implement things.
So Kenny, as we wrap up, I want to ask you just one question for leaving for the audience, and it relates to advice for the entrepreneurs out there. And I like to frame this one a little bit different. I'm not going to ask you your advice for the audience. I'm not going to ask you for the best possible advice that you've ever gotten, but I want you to think about what's one of the most memorable pieces of advice that you've gotten over your career and journey through entrepreneurship and business.
Memorable. Okay. Wow. There's so many. I'm just trying to filter through them. I think one of the most important ones I've gotten was, as a small business focus, you get distracted so easily, and I'm Mr. Distraction. So that's probably one of the most important. I also did get early on advice about having a good legal team. I think those are probably those are the two pivotal ones for me. I mean, I could go through. I have this whole chart of in my phone of things people say that I'm like, I gotta remember that one. So there's I think listening and I'll just even step back farther. Taking and I hate to even say this word network, but taking your friends and people I don't want to call it networks. It sounds so cheesy, if you will, but taking advice from people around you that see different optics than you is probably the best thing that I've done as an entrepreneur. I didn't do it early enough. I got so heads down in that first 5 to 7 years that, I mean, I was always on a plane right? And I got so heads down, half my friends probably thought I was dead. Gone. And so I stopped using Facebook. I stopped, it was just like everything was I just disappeared. And it was because I was so into what I was doing. But I should have made time and looked for more advice. So I think that's probably the best advice I can give anybody.
I love that. Absolutely love it. Before I let you go today, for the audience that's still listening, that's still watching here today, if they want to connect with you, they want to follow continue to see the work that you're working on, where's the best place for them to go for more information and or to keep in touch with you?
Okay, well, so we don't use it enough, but actually my next call is about improving our LinkedIn. I think find me on LinkedIn. I think that's actually how you found me. So I think that's the best place, and we'll start reaching out. But yeah, if you direct message me on LinkedIn, I make it a point to try to get back to everybody. So I would start there and then go from there.
Excellent. Well, if you are listening to this and you just heard, Kenny mention that you can find him on LinkedIn, I want you to go and send him a direct message. And don't try and sell anything. Just give him something that's not sales in the inbox today. That's genuinely, hey, saw you on the Ownership Advantage. Was a great conversation. And, make that connection, because I think those connections do really matter. So, Kenny, with that, I just want to say thank you again for taking the time. This has been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate you sharing kind of your experience and things like that. I think there's a lot of nuggets in there that we can really gravitate to and understand as entrepreneurs, and kind of make some decisions based on the learnings and lessons that you've had. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, I appreciate all your time, and hopefully people got something out of it.